Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar, Who is Leading the 5G Patent Race? My name is Tim Pohlmann and I'm very happy that you are joining us today. We have a great agenda ahead of us. We have great guest speakers here, experts in the SEP world that I'm happy to introduce to you now and that will later, after a first introductory presentation, speak to us and tell us all about the world of 5G, the licensing of 5G SAPs. Before I start, I would like to have some housekeeping rules. We do have here in the webinar a way to interact with us, and I would encourage you to do that. We have the Q&A box. We also have the check box. So if there's anything our experts say, if there's anything that I'm presenting that you have a question about, I'm encouraging you to use the chat box, use the Q&A and ask us any question. Also for you to know, this session here will be recorded and we will make the recording available afterwards. So if you are interested in that, please write us an email. Also, we will see presentations from myself that I will also make available afterwards. And we will see some slides also from one of the speakers, Takanori-san Abe, who will not make the slides directly available, but who will make a written essay about the slides available that you can also request afterwards. But without further ado, let me present the two speakers of today. And I'm super happy that both of them were able to make it, because they're both very busy men, and I was able to make them come here today. Let's start with Ran Zhu, who is the General Manager of Corporate Business Development and IP Strategy at Xiaomi. And Ran is heading the licensing programs of Xiaomi around all SAPs, not only 5G, of course, but he is a 5G expert indeed. Ran came to the world of wireless technology through his PhD at the University of Bristol. And he worked as a chip designer before that at Cambridge Silicon Radio and Samsung. In 2013, then Ran came back to China and he joined a startup called Shigu. And during these years with Shigu was the time when Ran entered into the world of IP, because that startup became acquired. Ran himself is the inventor and named author of over 100 granted patents. Today they have been, or as of today, they have been granted. And then early in 2016, when the company was acquired, Ran went over to Xiaomi to head the IP team there because they had to build an IP team around him. So now he is the man you have to talk to at Xiaomi when it's all about IP and licensing. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ran.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for the introduction. I'm really happy and honored to be invited for this session today. I see there are a lot of participants joining today's session, and I hope that we can have like a fruitful and productive discussion together. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for for joining, Ran. This is an honor on my end. And another honor is the second speaker here, Takanori-san Abe. He is the founder of the law firm ABE PARTNERS, a law firm that specializes in IP and international business transactions. Takanori-san is a leading expert on the topics of FRAND and SEPs, matters in Japan. He understands the situation in Japan, not like no other. Of course, every jurisdiction has his particularities, and he really is an expert. I'm, by the way, a big fan and reader of his newsletter that he's sending around on the latest information around FRAND and SEP topics, with the focus, of course, in Japan. He helped international companies to get better understanding about how SEPs are treated in Japan, especially in court judgments or communication of various Japanese ministries. So I'm happy to have you here, Takanori-san, today to speak on 5G, on SEPs, and also give us a bit of the perspective of Japan.
Thank you, Tim-san, for the great introduction, and it is my great honor to be a speaker here. Thank you.
Thank you. And for those people who do not know me, I think many do. I'm the founder and CEO of LexisNexis IPlytics. I will moderate this session today. But before we do that, I would like to give you a sneak peek of the latest data around 5G patent declarations, the patent statistics on 5G. As some of you know, there will be a report, a 5G patent statistics report published in only 2 weeks' time, and you today have the chance to get first results at your fingertips before it's published in 2 weeks' time in a longer report. But of course, before I present data, I always like to talk about some of the limitations, because we're not here to oversell and tell you, you know, these are 5G essential patents, for example, because we always have to remember when we look at data in our space, the data is based on self-declarations. And the reason is ETSI does not filter or confirm essentiality or clean the database. So this is a self-declaration database. And because of that, there is some level of, some people call that over-declaration, which is in some cases in good faith. Why? Because there are some jurisdictions, for example, the US jurisdiction, where some courts decide you have to, you know, declare your patents as to the ETSI IPR policy in a timely fashion. So that means your patent just has been filed, published as a pending application. Standard is not even final, which is exactly the time where they request you to already declare it. And then by design, obviously, your claims change, the standard develops in a different direction, and some of these patents end up as being not essential. So that database by design has a certain level of over-declaration. However, the ETSI data, on the other hand, is the most complete database that exists in the world. We can assume that any patent that has any relation to 5G is declared, at least at some point in time it is declared. And therefore, it is a starting point of information that is worth looking at, because it really gives you at least a complete picture of all patents related to 5G. Not all of them essential, maybe, but all of them related. However, the ETSI data is a raw database that is grossly inflated and is also, you know, part or subject to sometimes abuse of certain declaration behavior. But the good news is, with data analysis or data processing, you can get rid of that. You can clean the data, you can deduplicate the data, you can expand information. And that is exactly what we do at IPlytics. That's exactly why we're here for. To walk you through this just very quickly, I don't want to bore you too much with the nitty-gritties of it, but it's important to know. If you look at the numbers that are declared, over 40% of these numbers are not they're not matchable. Why? Because the numbers have a format that cannot be matched to an international patent register. So there's a lot of cleaning and matching needed to do that. Even more worrisome is that 20% of the numbers are ambiguous, which means you could match the number to 2 different patent families, which we know is impossible. One patent should be related to one family only. That means 50%, if you would match it that way, would be so-called false positives. And in order to really do accurate analysis, you have to clean out these false positive cases, understanding that a chemical patent obviously should not be part of the 5G landscape. But sometimes it's not so clear-cut that we have the telecom patent here and the chemical patent here and decide which way or which one is the right one. So there's a lot of data work done to do that. Patents are declared more than once. We have one patent, which is the most declared patent in our database, declared over 800 times to different versions of technical specifications across generations at different points of times over and over again. Also, family members are declared several times and separately. So there's a lot of deduplication to be done so that you can say, I am counting only patents on the family level as to the family definition maybe of ETSI, where you know, we're not double counting, triple counting, 800 times counting patents declared multiple times. However, also ETSI has missing data. Not everyone is aware. ETSI has a link, an API to the Worldwide Espacenet to get all family counterparts. The problem with that, ETSI only does that at the beginning when you declare the patent. You can imagine if your patent is declared and most of the counterparts are not even published worldwide, a lot of the counterparts are missing. We find over 50,000 patents family counterparts that are not part of the Etsy database, but that should be part of the database, because as to the Etsy rules, you only have to declare one basis patent. All other family members, as to the Etsy family definition, are considered under FRAND as well. We add those patents in our database at IPlytics, always with the label that this is not an original declared patent. Of course, if you don't want to count them in, you can do that, but that's something we do, making sure if you look at or across jurisdictions, you always have the full picture. And then, of course, you have to classify. 5G is not just a label that companies declare to. Companies declare to technical specification numbers, and technical specification numbers relate to different generations of standards. Even more versions relate to the generations. So one technical specification can even be across generations depending on the version. So you have to take the data from the 3GPP, add it to the declaration data, and identify the different generations to really make sense of it. And last but not least, any patent statistics is only worth something when you have accurate data on the latest ultimate owner of a patent. That changes a lot, especially for SEPs, I can tell you. Portfolios are sold, acquired, and change ownership all the time. Legal status, is the patent actually active, still alive, or has it expired or lapsed? And the family normalization, counting patents on the family level is also very important. So there are different steps here that we went through to make sure the data is accurate, deduplicated, cleaned, and not subject to an inflated behavior of weird declarations. In total, we find overall in the world, almost 600,000 declarations these days. We connect the world of patent documents, declarations, and contributions to make sense of it. And that's how it looks like. Basically, we take the number, we take the specification number, and then we connect the databases together to have one. Let's look at some data. Let's get excited about what the numbers show and see where we at here with the data. The first analysis, we do look at the companies that own declared 5G patent families, meaning those companies that could potentially also either license out or cross-license portfolios. And in 2015, that was 32 companies. Now in 2023, we have over 130 of those companies. And here we only looked at those companies that have at least 2 patent families that are granted and active in Europe or the US, at least as a quality threshold. So we do see that the number of companies more than tripled over the years. So we have a lot of companies claiming to own essential patents in the 5G space. We looked at the top 10 companies and the share of the declared 5G patents they own over time. And what this graph shows you, that even though we have over 100 patent owners, the ownership is quite concentrated, meaning the top 10 already own over 80% of the patents. So starting from 2015 with 60%, going up to a peak of 2019, 84%. But that has been decreasing again. So ownership in 5G is again fragmenting, right? Of course, if you look at today, the number is at 76%, so still very concentrated. The top 10 5G patent owners own already 76% of all declared 5G patent families. Still a strong concentration on the top 10, but it is fragmenting, constantly fragmenting, meaning the share of the top 10 is decreasing. We have more and more other patent owners that also own those patents. What is interesting here, we compare, this is the red line, we compare this with the blue line. The blue line are the same companies, and we look at the standard contributions they submitted for 5G. And that has been staying at a very constant level at around 74, 73, 72%. Right, so the technical contribution level is pretty stable, while patent declaration kind of like followed a wave. Some of the explanation, I have to say, is due to the 3GPP change of rules that they limit the number of contributions per meeting, but this is not the only effect, right? This is nothing that would necessarily show you for the top 10 a very stable level of contribution. We also look, of course, at rankings here. And I want to show you the top 10 and take that example to kind of show you that rankings are good to look at, but you always have to think about the underlying data and what the underlying data means for the ranking. We do have the top 10 here, the ones that we also created statistics from, and the overtime statistics that you just saw. The first column here is the rank of 5G families of active and granted at least in Europe and the US, right? You could now easily argue, why not also Japan? Why not also China here, right? That's a good question. And that's also other statistics that we will have in the longer report. But here we said, okay, the family has to have at least one active and granted in the US and one in Europe. If you look at this, we have a ranking of companies. The second column is we take the same patents identified and rank them as to the patent asset index, and we weight it by the patent asset index. So what is a patent asset index? That is a indicator that comes from patent site, LexisNexis patent site, and that's worldwide recognized actually as correlating to value, right? Of course, it is not the only determinant of value of a patent, but it strongly correlates with value, and it's a combination of normalized forward citations a patent portfolio receives by other companies, and the market coverage of the portfolio means in how many countries do you have a granted patent, which both are, we could agree, indicators for relevance. If you look at that, we do see quite interestingly, let's look at InterDigital. InterDigital has rank number 14 when only counting the patent families active and granted in the US. Patent asset index wise, they're number 5. That means they're going up in the rank to number 5, meaning they're one of the top 5 with that value indicator in there, showing that their portfolio may not be the biggest, but it definitely is of high quality. And if you think about the business model of InterDigital, which is about mainly getting revenue through licensing income, it makes a lot of sense because they're much more dependent on commercializing their patent portfolio. Last but not least, we also looked at the number of 5G relevant standards contributions submitted, showing the R&D input that companies are providing in the standard setting process, which may not always be patented. These may also, I mean, these are only technical contributions that we're looking at, but they may not always be patented. It's how committed they are to the standards development. And here we see, interestingly, companies like Ericsson and Nokia, which are the top contributors here, may not, maybe not in patents number 1 and 3, but in standards development for years, they have been one of the dominant ones leading the standardization projects. So you can see, depending on the data source, we have different rankings, which means if you want to rank companies, you really have to think about the question, how do you want to rank the 5G leaders? What is your question really about? And what is the data source that fits to your question? One interesting thing you can do then, when you have all that data, you could look at shares, for example, of patent pools. We have seen Avanci has launched a 5G program. It's actually 5G multimode. So we looked at the share of all Avanci members, and we looked at that only counting the patent families as to Europe and US granted, 80% Avanci's share. The value indicator with the patent asset index shows that we have 83%, and then even 85% is the one on the very right, actually. Sorry for confusion here. The first one was, granted and active across the IP5. The second one is only US and Europe. And the last one is with the patent asset index. And you see, again, also Avanci's share changes from 80% to 85%, depending on, which underlying data you're using. In general, what we can say, however, if we look at the number of declared patents related to 5G, the pure number of patents is almost double as many patents as we've seen declared for 3G and 4G together, right? So the sheer amount of data of patents that are declared in the 5G world is really been increasing, right? It's a drastic increase compared to 3G and 4G, and by magnitude, more patent families than before. And that is also true with our contributions. If you look at the number of contributions that we relate to 5G, The number has been constantly increasing. This is a cumulative number, but as of today in 2023, we have almost 1 million contributions technical. And these are only technical ones, right? We identify only the technical 5G contributions submitted at the meetings. It just shows also the complexity of standards development and how many companies in the world work on this, which is, I think, quite astonishing if you think about the innovation and the people coming together. Some say the 3GPP is probably the biggest open innovation project of the world. Now let's look at countries. We look at the 5G patent family share by the region of the headquarter of the 5G owning company. And as you can see, the share of Chinese companies has been constantly increasing and is, as of today, at 33%. So every third 5G patent owner is a company that originates from China, followed by the US and followed by Korea, 24% in Korea. Also, Korea has a very large share, mainly driven, of course, by the large ones, the Samsung and LGs. Then US, we have, of course, the Qualcomms and InterDigitals, and then Europe, the Ericsson, the Nokias, but also smaller companies. Interestingly, though, in the second graph here, we do not count the shares by the number of patents the companies own. We just purely count the companies that have at least 10 5G patents. And if we do that, China is still, of course, among the leading ones, but US has more companies that have at least 10 5G declared patents than China, with 21%. China has 20%, followed by Europe, 18%, followed by Korea, 18%. We have Japan here at 11.5%, and also in the share before was 6.4%. But if you only count the companies, not by the share, so of course the concentration of the top 10 is then kind of evened out, then it's even more an evenly divided picture. I think one thing from these statistics shows the world of SEPs is definitely international, right? We can always go back and forth of which country has most of the companies, but it definitely is a good share across the US, Europe, Korea, China, and Japan, and Taiwan. You know, there's a very good distribution across all these different jurisdictions and regions, which shows how international it is and how, of course, also the world has to work together on an international level to make it work. Well, these were just some statistics. There's a full report. You have to wait another 2 weeks. If you want to make sure you get a version of the report, send us an email. You're more than welcome, and I'll send that to you. Of course, if you're interested in the data as a user, you can do that as well. Now, I want to hand over to the people, the experts that I introduced at the very beginning, and I would love to, of course, get a first feedback from you guys on what you have just seen on the 5G patent statistics. Maybe Ran, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So thank you for the introduction just now, Tim. I think you have done a very amazing job. Although I didn't see, Xiaomi's name on the top 10 list, is a little bit disappointing, but you explained it very clearly that, ranking is just a ranking, right? You need to understand what the methodology is, criteria, how you utilize to come up with a ranking, right? I just want to share with you, if some of the audience don't know, Xiaomi is also a big 5G standard essential patent holder around the world. And according to a recent report done by CAICT, is a research organization in China, Xiaomi ranks number 10 globally. So that is, definitely, shows that Xiaomi has contributed and invested in 5G standard essential patent portfolio for many years. That is a natural result. So back to the presentation you just shared with the audience, I think on the macro level, it has provided a lot of insights. I think that's very interesting. And for the industry, especially when we talk about the standard essential patent like 5G SEP license, some of the data are very important for us to start the conversation as a starting point, right? I think you explained a little bit at the very beginning that, for example, the ETSI database if you just rely on that database, probably you need to do a lot of your self work. So it would be great if we can have some third party like IPlytics to do some like cleaning work at least, right? But on top of that, I think you have also achieved a lot of results by relying on the ETSI declaration data, and on top of it to provide more insights, right? So regarding the some of the data you've shown, I think you're mostly focused on EP and US, right? Like the granted patent for the counting, right? So one suggestion I may have or feedback I may have to give you, as you pointed out that one out of three 5G standard serial patents is from China, right? So if you could have the flexibility or possibility to include the Chinese patent as one of your methodologies to count the numbers, I think that would be like more relevant to the industry. Okay. And another point, I think from my daily work, which is quite challenging, even though we can have like a high level or ballpark number regarding each company's declared standard patent, but 5G is a large scope. It has enabled a lot of vertical areas. So if we can have like more insights on, for example, how many 5G patents are related to smartphone business, right? How many 5G patents are related to, for example, infrastructure business, or even for like IoT business? I think that could bring more clarity in the industry and pave the way for like more smooth or productive licensing discussion between the companies. So that is one thing. I think you have already achieved a very fantastic job, team, and your company. Okay, this is just one of the suggestions I want to make. Another point I think you have done that is very important is there are a lot of contributions in 3GPP, right? The number is like really, really massive. And in our licensing, real life licensing discussion, when we talk to a particular licensor, some of the licensors tend to share with us that, okay, we are a big contributor to the standard. To some level, I think that can tell the story about the effort in the standardization process, but we all know that it is not necessary for each contribution to link to a standardization patent. Some of the contribution is, for example, one extreme example is that it's just a grammar change, right? It has nothing to do with the technical aspect. But I think from your database, it has the capability to link between a contribution to a particular standardization patent. I think that can definitely bring more clarity and transparency in the licensing world, okay? And I think one point that you probably didn't introduce that much is about other area beyond the 5G standardization patent. Nowadays, for example, audio video codec standardization patent, Wi-Fi standardization patent, a lot of data points are like missing right now. Okay, I think that the industry is still working on reaching some sort of consensus regarding the fundamental data. This effort is still ongoing, but I hope that IPlytics, I believe you have already noticed this important point and started to work on it, right? So I really look forward to see like more useful data that can be utilized in licensing discussion and to bring more like a clarity for the industry. So I said a lot, but overall speaking, this report, I really look forward to it. So it's like in 2 weeks time, right? So I can get a chance to read it thoroughly. Okay, thank you. These are the feedbacks.
Thank you so much, Ron. You will see the report. Xiaomi, of course, is also ranked in there. And also we have statistics of the IP5. So you are right, counting in Chinese patents is important as well. We even have a whole section on how to identify within 4G, 5G IoT protocols like NB-IoT, LTE-M, Cat1. That is also part of it, not to spoil too much, but some of what you said, we kind of are looking into. And of course, you can imagine This is who is leading the 5G patent race. Soon we will have who's leading the Wi-Fi 6 patent race, and soon we will have who's leading the VVC patent race. So stay tuned on those. Later this year, maybe beginning of next year, there will be more. But very good points, Ron. Thanks also for some insights on how data can or should not be used in the licensing world. I think these are exactly the real world pieces of information that are super exciting for us to understand, because we're building this, of course, for the industry to be useful and not to confuse anyone with data.
Of course, fantastic.
Great, thank you so much, Ron. Takanori-san, any ideas on the data and statistics you just saw?
Yes, thank you very much for the very detailed data and analysis, which was very exciting to see. And it may be a little bit emotional to say, but as a Japanese, I was a little bit sad to see that Japan was behind in 5G. And people are talking in Japan, what is the reason Japan is behind in 5G, although Japan was top in 4G? So I want to know your thought, the reason why.
Thank you, Takanori-san. And I can tell you, and I'm German, and I can tell you, you would look at the numbers from Germany, we would be even further below than Japan, very far away from everything. The only reason Europe is up there is because of our Scandinavian and Finnish friends. I think it's, of course, always a matter also of how the industry is structured. Japan has an industry where most of the telecommunication and handset manufacturers given up their business to other companies, which is heavily focused on the world of automotive and car OEMs and car suppliers. But also, of course, if you think about home entertainment and home appliances, these are typically industries where it's not so SEP heavy. There's no chip manufacturer. And that, of course, is also true for a country like Germany. I always felt like Germany and Japan have very similar economies, lots of small, medium-sized international global companies, and a strong automotive industry. And I think comparing that here, I think the Japanese industry is quite similar in that regard. Japan may be not the producer of 5G that much, but Japan will for sure be a user of 5G. And I think that's something we will discuss now and think about the use cases of 5G and how this will influence the industries. And I'm sure Japan will have some, or will see and experience some of the influence there.
Thank you.
And that brings me to the first question. I think just quickly, let me see. Oh yeah, there's a question on the data of Etsy. Yes, there's a cutoff date when the analysis was done, which is July 15th. So we took any patent that has been declared up until July 15th that was published and granted up until that time, and where the ownership was known by that time, right? So that's the cutoff date. There's another question, I think, Ron, that's because you mentioned it. Is there a way to differentiate RAN versus the core network in any good way? And I think that also kind of looks at infrastructure or device level. Of course, patents are declared to technical specifications, and 5G alone is 1,200 of those specifications that we have. And I can tell you, we do know certain working groups that work only on infrastructure, and specifications coming from those working groups you can consider as infrastructure patents. So there is some way in our data to do that, to analyze that, with the, of course, kind of assumption that patents are accurately declared by the company, self-declared, of course. So that is the assumption behind it. But on the technical specification level, there is ways. However, to do it really accurately, we all know we would have to go into the claims and look at the claims and see if the claim elements read both on device and network level or only network level. And that doing that in a very automated way is, of course, a little bit more challenging. So that's, the limitations of data maybe, but that will be the accurate way to do it, if that answers the question. But you can look at every particular single working group and where the TS is coming from. So I can tell you how many patents, 5G patents, have been declared from TS that come from RAN 1. right? That is something we can do in IPlytics or CAT1 or something like that. So that this is really possible. Good. Maybe handing over then to my first questions. And I think what I wanted to get started with is why 5G is critical in terms of what technical advances can we expect, or are we already seeing here? I think 5G is up and coming. I think not used yet to the full potential, but the big question is, what is the potential, right? I think it's not only that I'm downloading a video a bit faster. What are the use cases that you can see, Ran, and what do you foresee as new application levels?
Right. So maybe I can start to share a little bit the insights from a smartphone manufacturer's point of view. Okay. So basically, when we talk about 5G, as I mentioned earlier, it's like a big concept. It has a large scope. In terms of the capability of 5G if you compare to 4G, definitely it can provide a higher data rate because of the higher bandwidth and also, like millimeter wave, massive MIMO type of technology used in 5G, right? It can enable higher data rate. And for the service or applications like, video streaming, content downloading, it can definitely bring more or better user experience compared to 4G, right? In addition to that, massive machine type communication is another area for 5G to enable. Nowadays, we talk about like a cellular IoT type of devices and services. I think the 5G definitely, bring more value for that point. That is a second advantage for 5G compared to 4G. The third one is the low latency for mission critical type of applications. We don't see a lot of for consumers, these kind of features or products or services. But these three corners, if like 5G compared to 4G, is definitely have like enhancement compared to 4G. But honestly, I want to share from the smartphone manufacturer point of view is that if you want to figure out, identify a killer app which exists for 5G but does not exist for 4G, you probably cannot find one. Okay, this is a little bit disappointing. We even have one brainstorming session talking about what could be the killer app for 5G for on smartphone, right? And it's very hard to identify one. Maybe it's like a better user experience. You can download the stuff, more quickly. Then probably that's it. The point I want to make is because we're talking about standardization of the patent, we're talking about licensing, right? So there is always this argument. I think the industry still has not reached such consensus. Is that does 5G deserve like a higher rate compared to 4G, right? I think that there's like a clear no answer. So I think it's from the product point of view, there is a strong reason why there is no such consensus regarding a proper comparison between 5G frame rate versus 4G frame rate. But also, I think people are like looking forward to some new application or services in 5G era, right? We talk about AR, VR stuff like Apple. They announced their Apple Vision Pro new device, but I think it's still not there yet. Okay, it's still not there yet. Another point for 5G I see which could be appealing is it can enable a lot of vertical area like industrial IoT. So I think that part is something that we look forward to see. They could create more use cases and scenario. Even for the licensing business, it could be like a new market to tackle, right? Automotive, I think, is another exciting area. Nowadays, people consider that a car, it has the intelligence that it can do like autonomous driving, and also it has certain intelligence, like a big smartphone on 4 wheels, right, if you like. And also the screen size in the car these days, like a Tesla car or other vehicle, you can tell it's like a small television in the car, right? So for the automotive, I think 5G can definitely bring more value if you compare to like just a smartphone. So these are the roughly the take I have regarding 5G compared to 4G, especially from a smartphone manufacturer point of view. And there is also I just want to share with you a very interesting saying is that if we look at the generation, if it is an odd number, it can be more successful. Like 2G, 4G, 6G. And now 5G is like people talk about it and they really want to see more things happening, but it really didn't happen that much or as we expected. And people already started to work on 6G standardization these days already, okay? And at least they are doing some preliminary research on what 6G could do, right? And I think the 6G is also something that we look forward to. At the same time, we're expecting some more use cases and scenarios that can be enabled by 5G.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Rand, for your thoughts here and some insights. I hope, is it next year we will also see the Xiaomi car at some point?
Yeah, we are working on it very hard these days. So the plan is that for Xiaomi, we are going to have like mass production early next year. So stay tuned, okay? It will be amazing. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Rand, for your thoughts on the 5G application. Takanori-san, 5G, why is it so important? Why is it so critical? What are the use cases? I think you have prepared some data and information in the slide deck even. Yeah, we all see it. But you are on mute.
Okay, can you hear me?
We hear you now. Perfect.
Thank you. There are three features: ultra high speed, minimum latency, and multiple simultaneous connections. And okay, ultra high speed. Yes, to download the 2 hours movie, 4G took 5 minutes, but now 5G enables to download in 3 seconds. This is great, but this may not be the most important feature. The most important features are the rest of the two, which is the latency. The transmission time lags are eliminated and enabling real-time operation and control of robots and automobiles in remote locations. This is very important in the automated driving to avoid car accidents, because in 4G, the delay time is about 10 to 40 milliseconds. So there is a slight delay. But in 5G, the delay time is only 1 millisecond. So this is quite close to the feeling of the real driving, and the driver can avoid the accident, which is very, very important. And simultaneous connections, it enables a widespread use of IoT for stadium, event venues, and disaster scene and other applications. And use cases, the 5G will be expected to be implemented in these fields. And the game change may occur in the following industries. First, the automotive industry. The President Toyota said that the automotive industry is currently facing an era of major transformation, which occurs only once every 100 years. And now they are facing new competitors, technological companies, which have entirely different views from the automotive industry. So in order to survive, he says that he has decided to redesign Toyota from a company that makes automobiles into a mobility company. This is exactly the same concept as the mobility as a service. And another one is truck platooning. Let's see the video. Can you?
ドライバーの運転する先頭車両に追従して適切な車間距離を保ちながら隊列走行を自動化することで後続車両の運転者の負担を軽減し燃料の節約や渋滞の緩和にもつなげていくことを目指しています。トラック隊列走行では 複数台のトラックが超低遅延で相互に映像や情報をやり取りすることが必要です。
Yes, and in the medical field, the smart cyber operating theater networks the medical equipment operating theater facilities to centrally manage medical information and images during surgery. And in the healthcare fields, because Japan adopts the national health insurance system, so it's easy to collect the big data. So there is a potential in Japan to collect the big data in this healthcare fields. And Toyota is building the smart city in which is called Woven City, which can also be a game changer. Thank you.
Great. Lots of good insights. Takanori-san, very good. Thank you. So I see across all industries, I guess it's also about adoption of connectivity in general to make 5G really a game changer. So I guess that's probably something we will see only in the upcoming years when also the industries change, right? With new applications and new features that may, of course, be based strongly on 5G, but also maybe in combination with other standards, as we discussed earlier today. Very good. Thank you so much for these insights. With all that, new applications and everything, of course, there's also a challenge that is approaching, which is the licensing of the SEPs, right? I think in handsets, I think the game is well known. Ron, you said that earlier. It's about, you have licenses for 3G and 4G with most of the major players, I'm sure, but now it's the update on 5G and how much more worth is 5G. But I guess in general, the contracts are somehow in place and the structures are known. But how about new use cases? How about new industries, IoT, automotive, healthcare? What about those? Do we have systems that work yet? Where are we with SEP licensing at the moment, and where do you see the future?
Yeah, maybe I can start to share some of the things I have observed regarding the question raised here. So you're right, for 4G, some of the big licensors in the industry, they have their exercise of doing the licensing business, to license a smartphone manufacturer, if you like, right? And these days, some of the big licensors, or most of the big licensors, have already announced their 5G licensing rate publicly. You name it, like Qualcomm, Nokia, Ericsson, InterDigital, Huawei, they all announced their 5G rate publicly, right? So I think if you compare 4G licensing effort to 5G licensing effort by these companies, I think it will be very similar, meaning that they will still carry on the ordinary or common course as they did in the past in 4G era to license the handset manufacturers. Although there is still the dispute, as I shared just now, whether for 5G standards or patent, it should deserve like a higher rate, or it should be like similar to 4G or maybe even lower, right? That is depend on the dispute and the argument between the two sides. But very interestingly, you can see, for example, like Avanci, they set up the 4G program first. Later on, they set up the 5G program, announced the rate as well. And it is amazing to see Avanci can create this platform to aggregate most of the either 4G standards patents or 5G standards patents in a single platform to tackle a vertical area, right? I think that these trends may replicate for other verticals in 5G Europe, like IoT, right? There could be some, there are already some pool efforts in 5G to license, for example, some sort of IoT type of devices by setting up a pool to increase the efficiency of licensing. From Xiaomi's perspective, we definitely endorse or support the pool solution, because if the pool can really provide a so-called one-stop solution, meaning that they can aggregate most of the patents for a particular technology in a single platform. At the same time, the market is willing to entertain the license rate. It can definitely increase the efficiency of licensing very significantly. Otherwise, it will for the licensee to do, like a bilateral discussion one by one, and it will be very time consuming. And it could also be involve a lot of fractions in the industry, right? So honestly, I think, taking that example, we may be able to see something similar to that coming up to tackle other vertical areas. But if you just look at the smartphone, I think it will probably be similar to the 4G era. That's my observation. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for those insights, Ran. And yeah, I think we do see also even Marconi has an IoT program, not yet live, but announced. Sysvel has one announced, also not yet live, but there are at least licensors listed on NB-IoT and LTE-M. So there are things moving in the pool world towards more licensing on the pool level. Great. Takanori-san, what is your take on SAPs and licensing and all this?
Yes. Can you see the slides?
You do.
Okay. As Timson's analysis shows, the Japan is behind in 5G, and the Japanese government is encouraging the Japanese companies that in beyond 5G era, Japanese companies should aim to acquire SCPs, so to have many SCP holders. And last year, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry issued the SCP licensing negotiations guidelines, which adopted the 4-step approach. And the guideline says in step 1, the SCP holder should provide a claim chart, which shows that the guideline is obviously on the implementer side. And this is because the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry believes that currently there are more implementers in Japan than the SCP holders. But it means that if in beyond 5G or 6G, if there are more SCP holders in Japan, it may be that the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry will change the guideline to be favorable to be SCP holders. And I would like to address a little bit about why Japan is behind 5G. It's because of the lack of investment and the low sales volumes of 5G compatible terminals. And the 5G business is like a chicken and egg in the chicken and egg situation. The infrastructure improvement and use cases and devices terminals, they rely on each other, but they can do well. So the Japan is heading for 6G and the NTT is working for ION. And so far, the conversion is required for each data transmission and processing. It causes the conversion loss and energy consumption. But in ION, everything will be done by optical signal. So there's no conversion required. And the ION will process all data by the optical signals. And then it will allow the large amounts of data at once. And because of these optical technologies, ION is supposed to solve social issues associated with explosive growth in the data traffic and network. And predicting the future is a key. So in the healthcare field, analyzing the biodata and the individual prevention and quick response in case of illness is expected. And let's see how NTT introduced ION.
And many more technological innovations, such as automated driving, will continue to take place. Highways have led to the creation of new services, helped various industries develop, and even changed our own culture. ION can do the same. ION will push the limits of the information and communication infrastructure, impacting fields like transportation, medicine, finance, and education by creating new services and value. We hope you'll join us as we create a smarter world to support the future.
Thank you.
Great, Takanori-san. Thank you so much. We have another question here from the audience, and that is in regard to litigation. So I think we had the smartphone wars where there was a lot of litigation on competition, I would say, but it was often also on SEPs. Then we had SEP litigation, maybe driven by some of the patent assertion entities. Then the automotive litigation waves last year before Avanci, or when Avanci was pushing, or the Avanci members at least were pushing for it. Is there any expectation on litigation for 5G, and when and where would that be? Ron, any ideas on trends that we could see, or any expectation where and when, you know, larger SEP litigation will happen or is already happening?
Yeah, I think definitely, you know, since there will be like more and more 5G products available, like smartphone, you know, for example, taking Apple as an example, 100% of their phones are 5G capable. But if you look at, you know, party like Xiaomi, maybe less than 50% are like 5G capable. But in the future, the 5G capable devices will dominate for sure, right? So from the valuation point of view, you know, litigation will get more 5G standards patent involved in the future. That will definitely be the trend, okay? But nowadays, I think the challenge is that we are going through a transition period from 4G to 5G product-wise. And also due to the overlap, significant overlap between 4G and 5G standards patent, in terms of the valuation of the patent license to a specific company, if they have a mixed product of 4G and 5G products, that could be a really complicated case, okay? But that is about the so-called front rate, or, you know, front rate valuation kind of issue, whether that can be really identified or, you know, really calculated precisely. It could be really hard. But this is also a interesting period of time that we could, you know, for the whole industry to recognize how to do a proper valuation of 4G, 5G standards of patent for license. And also that could potentially pave the way for future like 6G when it comes. And, you know, the same problem may rapidly.
Oh, I think we lost Ron there for a second.
My connection was not so good. So we definitely need 6G coming up, okay? So what I was saying is that maybe, you know, this kind of challenge is useful for us to pave the way for like the future consideration if we transition from 5G to 6G.
Great. Thank you so much, Ron, for the input. Just maybe one final question on China as a jurisdiction. Do you think also more litigation will happen in China?
I think so. That will be the trend. There are already some litigations ongoing in China about 5G, and you know that there is some of the big dispute between Chinese company, handset maker, and some of the big licensors is happening, is taking place in China, right? So, you know, there could be the case that global rate may be ruled in the near future. So stay tuned. I think, you know, given that China already has a lot of 5G standards or patent owners, and also we have a lot of products. So China will become more and more important jurisdiction for litigations in the future. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Takanori-san, your final thoughts on SEPs and litigation. I know there was not much yet in Japan, but you keep saying there will be some more, right?
Right. Yes. Yes, the SEP litigation, this is very serious, and there is a tensions in the individual disputes and also the rulemaking. The anti-suit injunction is a serious issue, and the European Commission asked questions regarding TRIPS agreement to Chinese government, but almost no answer. So there's a trade war already arose. And the Japanese Ministry of Economy and Trade and Industry issued a guideline last year ahead of the foreign authorities intentionally because the ministry wanted to be involved in the global rulemaking. In other words, they don't want to be influenced by the foreign authorities. And recently, European Commission issued the SEP regulation, and there are many criticisms. And the criticism from the US, the former US DOJ, FTC, USPTO heads say that SEP policies should consider the practical impact on industry and relevant geopolitical realities And draft regulations would work great harm to the European and American innovation economies and permit our global competitors to continue to erode the value of our intellectual property rights. So the dispute is very huge. And Mr. Patel, the previous CEO of Teachers, published the article titled "Why the Auto Sector is Heading for an IP Reckoning." He says that the automotive industry as well as smartphone industry will take more than a decade and billions of dollars to resolve the litigation. So there will be many SEP litigation and non-SEP litigation in this field, I believe. And as Timson said, so far, very few SEP litigation in Japan, but once people understand that the Japanese courts shifted to the pro-patent oriented, the larger damages, injunction, higher winning rate, then people will begin to file the lawsuit in Japan, I think.
Very interesting. So a lot of things to come for 5G SEP licensing. Lots of insights here on use cases, on the world of SEP licensing, litigation trends, data trends. I'm super happy to have you guys in here today. Ran, Takanori-san, this was a pleasure. Lots of insights. I hope the audiences liked it as well. If there are any open questions to us, or also to our panel speakers here, do not hesitate to write us an email. I will make sure to forward those questions to our experts here. But let me close this one for now. Thank you, Takanori-san, Ran, for joining us today. This was really great. Hope to see you soon. Thanks for the audience again.
Bye.
And talk to you soon. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.